The stage, our filmmakers. In the middle, Hannah Ayers, next to Hannah, Lance Warren. Thank you very much for this wonderful documentary. I had the pleasure of meeting Hannah and Lance, was it 2018?
2017, I believe.
17? When they premiered their film here, An Outrage. Which is about the history of lynching in the United States. And so it's like the third or fourth time I've seen this, and I think of this as Outrage 2. But to me, this is just a very, very powerful example of what historians like to say, and that is that the present is conditioned by the past, that we continue to live with choices made generations ago. And so, but you can also say that we're living with other issues from the past, whether it's voting rights or immigration or what. So could you tell us in a few minutes how you settled on this project, this particular topic?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here, and we're really honored to have this film here and to be back at this festival. It's in the 4 years since premiering An Outrage here, Middlebury has continued to stick out as a really special place where we got to share our work, and it's a privilege to be back. So Lance and I were not planning on directing a feature-length film in 2020. It wasn't actually a goal of ours in general. We typically do shorter content. But it was really the fact that we were living 3 blocks away from Monument Avenue, and at the end of May and beginning of June, starting to see the streets fill up with protesters, and all of the streets shaking with demands for justice for George Floyd and so many others. And seeing all that coalesce around Monument Avenue, we thought this is a powerful moment where more people are paying attention than usual, and the Black Lives Matter signs are going up. Maybe folks are willing to listen to not only, what do we need to do now, but where is all this coming from? What is the context of these monuments that have been here and have really, for many white residents, just been a background to things like the Easter Parade and the Monument Avenue 10K, and that they really haven't grappled with. Well, now there's all of this energy coalescing around these monuments and demands to take them down. Why is that? Why are they here in the first place, and why do they matter so much? So, as Lance and I have been producing films about history and social justice for 10 years. This felt like, well, we didn't plan on doing something about our hometown, but this is something that we need to seize, a moment we need to seize, because we could really help illuminate the history behind this moment.
And with that, we really appreciated that what we were seeing in the streets in the summer of 2020 was only the most contemporary extension of a history of resistance that stretched back to the time of emancipation, the time of the Civil War, and before. It was one history reflected in the monuments, like monuments anywhere, of the ideas of the people that put them up. But also, and much harder to see in Richmond, because this history has often been not taught, even hidden, there is in the history of the monuments a history of Black resistance that can be found. A long history of decades and generations of Black resistance to white supremacy in its many forms, of which the statues are one aspect. They were sort of flashpoints in that long history of Black resistance in Richmond over time, these monuments and resistance to them. But it's part of a much larger effort involving voting rights and communities being destroyed and communities standing up. And that longer history, the roots of the powerful protest that we were seeing last summer, we felt that if we could tell that story and get people to appreciate that story, then it wasn't maybe just a conversation about, oh, do you agree with the demands and the tactics of the protesters? Oh, what about all that graffiti? To say, let's take a step farther back and realize that we are in a historical moment. We're living in textbook times, and we can see that bigger picture and benefit from it and better appreciate the community we have before us. And maybe if we get on that same page, right? Because we're not on the same page so often when we think about the past, which makes it really hard to figure out the next steps. If we could have some mutual understanding of how we got here, then now, as Richmond, as Virginia, as this country needs to figure out where to go, maybe we could have a more productive conversation about where to go.
Well, I certainly would like to think that your film will lead to some kind of mutual understanding in this country about statues and other matters of race. So you, in doing your film, you combine some very powerful, rich primary archival research into wonderful photographs and documents. You also had access to some really powerful speakers, historians, politicians even. That was great. So were there some significant challenges that you ran into that you had to overcome in making this film, or maybe force you to take a different course of action or detour? What were some of the challenges you had?
It was certainly intimidating to think about telling the history of Richmond, 160 years of Richmond's history in 90 minutes. So the storytelling was a challenge, but also the fact that we thought it was important to film this in the midst of last summer. So we got underway in June, in July, in the middle of the pandemic, which is why all of the interviews were done outside. In record-breaking hot weather days. And amazingly, everyone we asked to participate, with very, very few exceptions, agreed and saw the urgency that we need to capture this moment, and not only what's happening on the streets, but also just the aura of last summer and how that informed everyone's perspectives on the past and on the present day of the city. It was certainly just a very exhausting production experience and nerve-wracking to ask people to take a risk and meet with us during the pandemic. But we do feel like it was important to not only really seize the moment and interview people about their perspectives in that time, but also to get it out about a year later. We thought, this should come out at the anniversary of last summer, because again, we're trying to grab people's attention and say, let's not forget about what last summer felt like, when it felt like change was really possible. And we did see some change, but what remains to be done? So much. So we really pushed to get it done and to get it out around this time of year.
And with that, I just want to emphasize the we that Hannah refers to there is a huge team, right? There's a lot of people's names in the credits, and we couldn't have done it this quickly and this professionally without that team. Just to name a couple of people who were particularly central to the effort, a woman named Charlotte Jurgens, who had a film in this festival a few years ago about veterans, World War II. She's a fantastic filmmaker in her own right, working on new projects now. She had gone on to work at NBC Archives. She has a degree in history, a master's degree in history. And so she was invaluable. Her efforts in really every archival image you saw passed through her fingers at some point. There's more than 300 archival items that you see on screen. And a gentleman named Chris Salvador, a collaborator for a number of years, the lead motion designer here, who brought together a small team of his own. Every one of the images that has the sort of 3D effect with the layers, that was handcrafted one at a time, taking the two animators over 4 months of work on that, and that sort of effort where everybody was just very committed and dug in and shared the vision, that's what made this possible.
You really crunched the time to get this out, and I'm very mindful of our time. It's just a little after 1:30. We have 2 o'clock showings here in downtown. If you are walking, you've got a good 15-minute hike back into town. So I think I'd like to turn this over to the audience and see if you have questions for Hannah or Lance. Yes. And I'm told the acoustics are good enough in here that you don't need a mic, but if you do, let me know.
So I'm curious.
So I can hear you, yes.
Do I need to take off my mask?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, thank you.
So I'm curious, considering that at this moment several state legislatures are beginning to pass laws that eerily reflect exactly what you showed happened in Virginia, and at the same time they're passing regulations about what narrative can be told and what history will prevail. Well, what historic view will prevail. Have you begun to find resistance to marketing your film in large sections of the country?
So far, no. And in fact, it's been encouraging close to home the embrace. So Richmond Public Schools, city school system, has been interested that early on in the process, we recruited a curriculum writer to work with us on this film. The most important work that we have done over the years has been to create a film as tools for teachers, who are the people that we really believe have the biggest chance to actually improve and change this country through the work that they do every day. And a gentleman named Rodney Robinson, who's the 2019 National Teacher of the Year. He also happens to be a 20-year veteran of Richmond Public Schools. We asked him to come aboard and write the curriculum, which he has, and that will be going into the city school system this fall, starting with a big teacher training workshop, and it has support from the superintendent on down to make sure that this film is really integrated. The Virginia Department of Education is also looking at ways of adopting that curriculum and folding it in. And the film, which will have its national broadcast premiere on September 15th on the World Channel, a PBS affiliate. We're working with PBS Learning Media to make it available that way as well. So far, it's encouraging, and what we're trying to focus on there is aligning the curriculum with various relevant state standards and Common Core state standards, so that for teachers, it's not another thing to teach, it's another way to teach, and it's something that supports work that they're already being required to do.
I saw a hand toward the back of the room a moment ago. No? Okay, over to the right, yes.
Yeah, is there any plan to take the statues that were taken down now and put them someplace else, like a museum, to this, with the appropriate historical narrative, the real narrative that they deserve?
Yes. So the city is going through a process where they accepted applications from historical sites, also private individuals, nonprofits, saying, here's why we want the statue and here's what we're going to do with it. So for each statue, they are deciding through a matrix kind of where each one should go. It looks like, for example, the Jefferson Davis statue will go to a local museum called the Valentine, and they want that statue as is, with paint on it, damaged from having been pulled down by a sedan and put on the back of a tow truck, because they see that that's the history, that is an important thing to preserve. So we think that it'll likely end up there. The others may go to museums. It seems that they're probably going to go to kind of birthplaces of those generals, and kind of so people want to go see them in that context. They can. In Charlottesville, of course, those monuments just came down about a month ago, and it looks like, well, one proposal is that they actually a group wants to melt down Robert E. Lee and transform it into other public art. So in the coming months, we'll see kind of where those pieces land.
Other questions? I see a hand back there, and then we'll come here, and then we might have to call in.
Yes. I don't think I heard an answer to this one. Have you actually shown the film in Richmond?
We have, yeah. We were fortunate to premiere it there as sort of community sneak peek screening at the end of June at a large park, kind of the big park in town. 720 people turned out. It was an amazing event. It was actually the largest public event in Richmond since the protest of last summer. And that was fitting, because once again, we as a community were confronting monuments. And there were a wide range of people there, from activists who had been in the streets to the governor that you saw in the film, and the First Lady. And it was a wonderful night. The city paper very accurately observed that there was a mixture of glee and reflection. And it was a really powerful sort of launch. And then it had a broadcast premiere on a Virginia PBS station about a week later.
Yeah, I was wondering about your decision to not include so many people who were for having the statues there. The residents on Monument Avenue, I think there was only really one person who spoke to that, so I was wondering what the decision behind that was.
We approached several, and they declined. Several of them were part of the lawsuit, and their lawyer said they shouldn't talk to media. One we actually interviewed, and then he didn't sign his release form, and we couldn't come to an agreement on that. I think and a similar question has come up with an outrage, and I think our perspective is those people have had their say for over a century. The statues have stood and they've been preserved, and there's been this aura about them, and so we felt that by showing kind of the background to the statues, we're demonstrating, why they've stayed up for so long, and it was more important to kind of reveal, well, what's the lesser known story about how people actually feel about them.
One last quick question, because it's almost 20 to 2. Yes.
Yeah, just give more background about why was tear gas deployed by the police when there's a black mayor in charge.
Yes, so there had been a curfew put in place the night before, and so the police were preparing to enforce that. What's not clear and has still not been provided a clear explanation for is why the tear gassing happened way before the curfew time. It was about 30 minutes ahead of the curfew. So there have been apologies, but not very good explanations of why that happened.
And I think a reality in Richmond, and I know it's a reality in many other cities as well, the fact that Richmond today has an African-American mayor means something different than when Richmond had its first African-American mayor in the 1970s. One of the things that means is that today's mayor, and this is an objective point that everybody, I think, including himself, would agree with, he's very much a centrist. He's a Democrat, but he's very much a centrist Democrat. He and the protesters in the streets, anyone and everyone in Richmond would tell you, they are not friends with each other. They are not fans of one another. The protesters detest the mayor, who is not an exaggeration. He's not a big fan of them. And so there are ideas about what is required to move a city forward anywhere you go, and certainly the mainstream view in Richmond is that that's wrapped up in economic development. But in the most recent mayoral election, which was in 2020, so we have this summer and then there's an election in November, and there's a conservative candidate, there's a very progressive candidate, kind of the candidate of the protesters, and there's this centrist candidate. And it was a bit of the election results were very muddled. Everyone got between, I think it was 21 and 31% of the vote. So this mayor was reelected, but not exactly with a strong mandate. The politics in Richmond are very muddled right now.
And was that your footage of the tear gassing, or was that newsreel footage?
It was footage collected by reporters of the PBS station locally. Yeah.
Well, I think we owe them another round of applause for this very, very powerful documentary.